I've been using the Sony a7S III for about a year now. I've shot about 1,000 hours of videos during this time. If you've read the specs sheet of the a7S III, you already know all the impressive features. But is it really as remarkable as it seems? In this video, I'll share my experience about using the Sony a7S III. Besides, I'll also let you know about some hacks that I tried which will speed up your workflow. So with that being said, let's get started. I usually shoot at 4K 60 FPS. Well, 60 frames in case you need slow motion footage. So that's kind of my default. Though I also sometimes shoot in 4K 29.97 frame rate. Only when I know for sure that I won't need to slow down my footage. But it's not like I never use 4K 120 FPS. I did. Rarely. Only when I need to slow down 5 times. I've shot 4K on mini cameras, but the 4K in the a7S III seems very neat and sharp to me. Now, let's look at the video settings I use. I usually record in all-I mode, using the H.264 codec, which is a lot less taxing on my computer compared to the H.265. When I shoot outside, and I have to shoot for long hours, I switch to 8-bit 422, as it takes less space in my memory card. But when shooting inside, I almost always use 10-bit 422 with sound and autofocus enabled on the SD card. Apart from that, this camera barely overheats. I was able to record over an hour in 4K 120 FPS before getting the overheat warning. But after switching to 4K 60 FPS, I recorded over 2 hours of video without any overheating warning, and I stopped only because the storage ran out. So I can confidently say that overheating is not an issue in this camera. At the base ISO of 80, I was able to shoot pretty sharp and noiseless footage. Though it seemed to me that the color reproduction was not up to the mark because I couldn't use the S-Log3 at this ISO number. For S-Log3, the base ISO is 160. Now let's see how this camera performs in the S-Log3. So with S-Log3, I'm now going to increase the ISO gradually. As you can see, the noise in the footage gradually increases as I increase the ISO number. And as I reach 640, the footage becomes a lot less grainy. Now let's get past 640. So that's ISO 10,000. Looks really grainy, right? But as I switch to ISO 12800, the magic happens. The footage is insanely neat. It's happening because of the dual native ISO. So if you have to increase the ISO, I'd likely recommend that you stick to ISO 640 or 12800 for a number close to those. Now let's see how the camera is capable of retaining dynamic range. The official statement claims that the Sony a7S III can maintain 15 stops of dynamic range. But honestly, everyone has their own standard of determining dynamic range. So official claims are not that believable. So now, let's see how much detail and color this camera can retain in real life. I recorded this footage using a non-long standard color mode of the a7S III. As you can see, the footage is absolutely usable right out of the camera. Though not much detail in the highlights and shadows. And after post-production, the video footage looks like this. Now let's check out the S-Log3 profile. I was able to increase the ISO a bit. Thus, you might notice more details in the highlights and shadows, and obviously, a much more cinematic color tone. And this is how it looks in the Cine 2 modes. After using it for some time now, I realized that the S-Log3 is excellent, but it also takes more time in post-production. So if I'm in situations where I have time constraints, I try to avoid using S-Log3. And instead, I use HLG3, which offers a little less dynamic range but considerably reduces the post-production work. However, if I have enough time and the project demands absolute perfection, S-Log3 is my only choice. You might be thinking that the a7S III is totally a video-centric camera and not capable of shooting quality images. Well, you're kind of right. If you're looking for high-res pictures for commercial use, the a7S III is definitely not the ideal choice for you. As a professional product photographer, I usually prefer to shoot on higher megapixel cameras, like the a7R IV, but that doesn't mean I always shoot on a dedicated high-res camera for photography. A 12 megapixel has some use cases. For example, I often take photos for social media. Video thumbnails are behind-the-scenes images, and to me, the results are pretty good. I'm also impressed by the insanely clear and almost lag-free viewfinder, and the high-speed buffer is also fascinating. I was able to shoot 200 images in continuous shooting mode before it started to slow down. Sony a7S III features a whopping 759 phase detection points, which is, in my opinion, one of the best autofocus performances in a hybrid camera. And to prove my point, I'm going to show you how this camera performs in underexposed and overexposed situations. So as you can see, my a7S III has managed to track down subjects up to 5 stops overexposed, and I was able to focus my subject in even -6 stops underexposed. As for stabilization, there are 2 modes, active and standard. But unfortunately, active mode gives me a 10% crop. While shooting 4K at 120 FPS, I was unable to use the active mode, and thus I was left only with the standard mode. But I usually keep stabilization off while shooting 4K 120 FPS, as everything looks smooth already because of the high frame rate. Though I'm not overly impressed by the stabilization of this camera, still, the active mode usually gets the job done while shooting at 4K 60 FPS. So that was all about my experience with the Sony a7S III. Undoubtedly, this is one of the best video-centric hybrid cameras in the market. Its video features are so damn good that I might not switch to any other camera for videos in a while, but I hope for better stabilization. And it's not just this camera, almost all the Sony cameras lag behind in stabilization technology compared to what Canon offers. And I really hope that Sony will come up with better in-body stabilization in the upcoming versions. So, what are your thoughts about the Sony a7S III? Let us know in the comment section.